Hi, class. So this week we're going to be focusing on the thermal sector. And one of the important things to consider about the thermal sector is simply the quality of our buildings. With the thermal sector, what we're worried about is home, business, industrial, um, and commercial, and residential heating and cooling. And heating and cooling, typically, you might think of as heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. You might think of it in various ways. Predominantly in the United States, it's done by natural gas, secondarily by electric. More or less uniquely in New England and in Rhode Island in particular, we have a relatively high percentage of people who burn number two fuel oil, which, if you weren't aware, is simply diesel fuel dyed red and untaxed, so they dye it red for tax purposes. Um, Now, why would we use number two fuel oil to a greater extent than other regions? Uh, it's because, in part, New England is what we call natural gas restricted. We don't have a heck of a lot of pipeline capacity. And if you take a look up on our page this week, I want you to see a pipeline map, and I want you to think about that a little bit. You'll see how there are relatively few natural gas pipelines coming into New England. And so, for the gas we do get, we're relatively reliant upon seaborne deliveries. And those sea deliveries come into the Port of Boston and the Port of Providence. And if you look at the Port of Providence, you can see various, petroleum gas storage tanks. And our fuel oil comes in much the same way. The majority of what we use around here is refined at the Irving Refinery in New Brunswick, Canada, off St. John, if you know the town. So if you ever go up north through Maine, past into Canada, it's the next city up along the coast there. You'll see a lot of jobs. Those are run by the Irving brothers, who are very, very wealthy, probably billionaire pair of brothers, who own a lot of the oil and refinery infrastructure up in Canada, a lot of the gas stations, some of the news stations, and things like that, too. Um, these fellas refine a lot of oil, and one of the ways that they manage to move their diesel along is this number two fuel oil that comes down that we use in New England largely to heat our homes. So ours doesn't come from where a lot of the oil in the rest of the country comes from. You may have heard of the WTI Cushing spot. In Cushing, Oklahoma, is where the West Texas Intermediate price spot. The price per barrel of oil you probably hear on the radio or read in the newspaper comes from there. It's not the only place where oil prices are quoted in the market, though. And typically, because our oil tends to come from Canada around here, it's more likely that we end up associated with Brent spot prices, which are on the London Exchange. Um, so it's worth realizing there are different prices of oil, right? The Brent spot that's traded on London, the WTI that's trading in Cushing, Oklahoma. The prices don't always match up, although they're usually pretty close to each other, and there are arbitrage opportunities if they get too far apart. Um, so we have to worry about fuel oil, and maybe only for a limited time. We have to worry about natural gas. Maybe you even think they're only for a limited time. But even if you electrify everything, where does our electricity in Rhode Island come from? But the vast, vast majority, well over 90%, natural gas, at least today. Now that's changing, and we'll see. Um, but right now, natural gas is a heavy way we get energy in the thermal sector. And if you want to start changing people over to electrify them so that they can be ready for any sort of clean energy future you might be envisioning, I think maybe the best way to go about doing something along those lines is to start installing newer technologies like air source heat pumps. And so, to that end, I will leave you an air source heat pump video. It's from This Old House, but it explains exactly how those work. And I think it's very informative and very clean and easy to understand. And those can heat and cool your house at, um, pretty efficient rates, much more efficient than the old style of electric heat. So for people considering the switch, um, there are provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act They give you tax credits to switch towards those sorts of ground air source heat pumps. And there are simultaneously new state programs rolling out right now as we speak that will give you money off those programs too. So you could conceivably save a lot of money by switching over and installing these things. Um, and perhaps they are the future, and that's going to be how we make the next step in thermal efficiency, at least at the residential and maybe small commercial level. Maybe it's going to take us longer to figure out something to do at the large scale commercial and industrial level. But whatever you think, I think hopefully this video has done some good to orient you to the thermal sector and what it is we're talking about when we talk about the thermal sector. And hopefully your readings put in this context will make much more sense. So I look forward to speaking with everyone, and we will see you next week when we move on to the electric sector, and the subsequent week when finally we start wrapping it up with the transportation sector and looking at the future of energy use in the United States.